German pilot escaped in 1945. 79 years later, his crash site revealed a secret. March 17, 2024, the Bavarian Alps, Germany. A team of environmental researchers from the Technical University of Munich trudges through melting snow at 2,847 meters above sea level. They're conducting a routine glacial retreat study when Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman's ground-penetrating radar detects an anomaly. The readings show a massive metallic object buried beneath 4.2 meters of ice and compacted snow, something that shouldn't exist at this elevation, in this location. Project leader Dr. Klaus Bergmann immediately recognizes the signature. Aircraft wreckage, he announces to his team, his breath forming clouds in the thin mountain air, likely from the war. But this isn't just any crash site. According to Luftwaffe records declassified in 1978, no German aircraft went down in this specific sector during World War II. The nearest documented crash occurred 23 kilometers southwest, near Oberstdorf, in February 1945. This plane, whatever it is, exists outside official history. The excavation begins on April 3, 2024. Alpine rescue specialists and military historians join the research team. Using heated water jets and careful hand excavation, they expose the twisted remains of a Messerschmitt Bf-109G-10 fighter aircraft. Serial number 491,386. Paint code RVT+DM. The fuselage is remarkably intact, protected by the glacial ice that's held it in a frozen embrace for nearly 8 decades. What happens next transforms a routine archaeological recovery into one of the most significant historical investigations of the 21st century. On April 11, 2024, forensic specialist Dr. Martina Schreiber carefully opens the cockpit canopy. She expects to find skeletal remains, standard procedure for war-era crash sites. Instead, she discovers something that makes her hand freeze mid-motion. The cockpit is empty. No body, no bones, no flight suit remnants. Nothing except a leather document case wedged beneath the pilot's seat, perfectly preserved by the cold. Inside that case, a Soldbüch military ID book belonging to Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, born April 22, 1918, in Heidelberg. Attached to the Soldbüch with a rusted paperclip is a handwritten note dated April 28, 1945, 2 days before Hitler's suicide, 9 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. The note, written in precise Gothic script, reads, "Wer dies findet, ich lieb. Suchen sei nicht nach meiner like, ich bin bereits gegangen." Whoever finds this, I am alive. Do not search for my body, I am already gone. Dr. Bergmann contacts the Bundesarchiv in Berlin that same evening. The response comes within hours. According to official Luftwaffe records, Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Adler was killed in action on April 28, 1945, when his aircraft was shot down by American fighters over the Bavarian Alps. His body was never recovered. His name appears on the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge memorial wall as missing in action, presumed dead. But if Adler died in his aircraft on April 28, 1945, why is there no body? Why did he leave a note claiming to be alive? And most disturbing, why would a skilled Luftwaffe pilot deliberately crash his fighter aircraft into an alpine glacier and survive? The investigation that follows will uncover one of the most meticulously planned escapes of World War II, expose an underground network that helped dozens of German military personnel vanish into new lives, and reveal how a single man orchestrated his own death while the Third Reich collapsed around him. If you want to see what investigators found in the weeks that followed, evidence that rewrites the final days of World War II, hit the like button and subscribe. Because what Friedrich Wilhelm Adler did in the spring of 1945 required precision, desperation, and a level of planning that still astonishes historians nearly 80 years later. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler entered the world on April 22, 1918, in Heidelberg, Baden-Württemberg, during the final months of the First World War. His father, Ernst Adler, served as a mathematics professor at Heidelberg University. His mother, Margarethe Adler, née Hoffmann, came from a family of civil engineers who'd helped design portions of the German railway system in the 1880s. Friedrich grew up in an environment that valued precision, logical thinking, and methodical planning, traits that would define both his military career and his ultimate survival. Records from the Heidelberg Stadtarchiv show that Friedrich excelled academically, particularly in mathematics and physics. He graduated from the Heidelberg Gymnasium in 1936, with marks placing him in the top 2% of his class. More significantly, he joined the Deutscher Luftsportverband, German Air Sports Association, at age 16, logging 127 hours of glider flight time before his 18th birthday. When the Luftwaffe formally emerged from the shadows of the Treaty of Versailles restrictions in 1935, Friedrich represented exactly the kind of recruit Hermann Göring sought: young, intelligent, physically fit, and already possessing fundamental aviation skills. Friedrich enlisted on October 7, 1936, 3 months after completing his civilian education. His Luftwaffe training file, declassified in 1992 and now housed at the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg, reveals an exceptional student pilot. He completed basic flight training at Neubiberg Air Base near Munich, transitioning to fighters at Werneuchen in Brandenburg. By June 1938, he'd accumulated 394 flight hours and earned his fighter pilot rating. His instructors consistently noted his exceptional situational awareness and unusually calm demeanor under pressure. Lieutenant Adler received his combat assignment in September 1939, Jagdgeschwader 53, JG-53, a fighter wing that would become one of the Luftwaffe's most decorated units. He flew his first combat sortie on September 9, 1939, a patrol mission over the Polish border that ended without contact. His first confirmed aerial victory came 6 days later when he shot down a Polish PZL-P-11C fighter near Radom. By the time Germany invaded France in May 1940, Adler had been promoted to Oberleutnant and commanded his own Schwarm flight of 4 aircraft. The battle records show he flew 89 combat missions during the 6-week campaign, claiming 7 confirmed victories against French aircraft. His tactical acumen earned notice. Rather than pursuing glory through aggressive but risky attacks, Adler consistently positioned his formation advantageously, preserving his pilots' lives while completing mission objectives. But it was during the Battle of Britain that Friedrich Wilhelm Adler distinguished himself and experienced the losses that would fundamentally alter his relationship with the war. On August 24, 1940, Adler's Schwarm engaged RAF Spitfires over Kent. In the chaotic dogfight that followed, Adler shot down 2 British fighters while sustaining damage to his own aircraft. He nursed his Messerschmitt Bf 109 E4 back across the English Channel, crash landing near Calais with his fuel tanks nearly empty. The incident earned him the Iron Cross Second Class and promotion to Hauptmann Captain, but it also marked the beginning of a pattern. Adler demonstrated exceptional skill not just in combat, but in survival. His personal life provided the stability that many combat pilots lacked. In June 1940, during a brief leave, he married Clara Hoffmann, a childhood friend from Heidelberg. Their daughter, Greta, was born on March 15, 1941. His son, Wilhelm, followed on January 3, 1943. Letters preserved by the family and later examined by investigators in 2024 reveal a devoted father desperate to shield his children from the war's horror. But the war had other plans. The strategic situation deteriorated throughout 1942 and 1943. As the Luftwaffe bled experienced pilots over Russia, North Africa, and in the defense of the Reich itself, Adler found himself reassigned multiple times. He flew missions over Stalingrad in winter 1940-1943. He engaged American bomber formations over Germany in 1943 and 1944. By early 1944, he'd accumulated 167 confirmed aerial victories, earning him the Knight's Cross on February 4, 1944, a decoration personally presented by Hermann Göring at Berchtesgaden. The citation for his Knight's Cross described him as a pilot of exceptional skill and unfailing devotion to duty. What it didn't mention was that Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Adler had begun expressing private doubts about Germany's ability to win the war, doubts he shared only with his wife in heavily censored letters. Then came the tragedy that would drive everything that followed. On February 22, 1945, the Royal Air Force conducted Operation Clarion, a massive coordinated strike against German transportation infrastructure. Dresden had burned the week before. Now the Allies intended to paralyze what remained of Germany's logistics network. Heidelberg, historically spared from major bombing due to its university and cultural significance, found itself struck by a navigational error. Records from RAF Bomber Command show that a formation of 6 Lancaster bombers, lost in heavy cloud cover and misreading their navigation coordinates, released their payload over the residential Weststadt district instead of their intended target near Mannheim. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's family lived at Hauptstrasse 47 in the Weststadt district. The Heidelberg city records document what happened at 21:47 Central European Time on February 22, 1945. 6 4,000-pound high-explosive bombs and dozens of incendiaries hit a 6-block residential area. Hauptstrasse 47 suffered a direct hit. Rescue workers recovered 3 bodies from the rubble the following day: Clara Adler, age 28, Greta Adler, age 3, and Wilhelm Adler, age 2. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler learned of his family's death on February 25, 1945, while stationed at Neubiberg Air Base. His commanding officer, Major Hans Waldmann, filed a report noting that Hauptmann Adler received the news with visible distress but maintained military bearing. What Waldmann couldn't see, what no one could see, was the psychological transformation occurring behind Adler's controlled exterior. A man who'd fought for nearly 6 years, who'd risked his life over Poland, France, Britain, Russia, and Germany itself, who'd believed he fought to protect his family, now had nothing left to protect. His daughter would never start school. His son would never speak his first words. His wife would never grow old beside him. In the final weeks of the Third Reich, as American forces advanced from the west and Soviet forces from the east, as the Reich contracted into an ever-shrinking pocket of territory, Friedrich Wilhelm Adler made a decision that would define his legacy. He would not die for a regime that had taken everything from him. He would disappear instead. Documents examined by investigators in 2024 reveal that Adler began his preparations immediately after receiving news of his family's death. He started withdrawing cash from his military pay account, small amounts that wouldn't trigger scrutiny, but which accumulated to 4,750 Reichsmarks by mid-April 1945. He quietly sold personal items to other officers. His Knight's Cross replica, keeping only the original, his dress uniforms, even his father's pocket watch. More significantly, he began cultivating a relationship with Oberleutnant Karl Richter, a supply officer at Neubiberg who developed a lucrative sideline in forged documents and black market goods. Records show that between March 1st and April 15th, 1945, Adler met with Richter at least 7 times, meetings documented in the base's visitor logs but whose true purpose remained hidden until 2024. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler flew his final official combat mission on April 23, 1945. He engaged American P-51 Mustangs near Augsburg, claimed no victories, and returned to base with his aircraft undamaged. 5 days later, according to official records, he would be dead. but official records, as investigators would discover, sometimes tell only the story someone wanted the world to believe. April 24, 1945, 6 hours, Neubiberg Air Base, Bavaria. The dawn breaks cold and overcast. American forces have crossed the Danube. Soviet armies stand at the gates of Berlin. The Reich's life can now be measured in days, perhaps hours. At Neubiberg, 18 kilometers southeast of Munich, the remaining pilots of Jagdgeschwader 53 know the end approaches. Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Adler rises from his bunk in the officers' quarters. He slept poorly, but then, everyone has slept poorly for months. The constant rumble of distant artillery has become the Third Reich's lullaby. He dresses in his flight suit, one he's deliberately selected because it bears no insignia except his rank. He leaves his Knight's Cross in his footlocker, wrapped in a handkerchief with his family photograph. At breakfast, he eats mechanically. Ersatz coffee, black bread, margarine. He speaks little. His wingman, Lieutenant Peter Kaufmann, later told Allied interrogators that Adler seemed distant, preoccupied, as though his mind existed somewhere other than the officers' mess. 8 hours. Adler reports to Major Waldman for the morning briefing. The orders are simple because options have narrowed to almost nothing. Fly combat air patrols, intercept Allied bombers if possible, preserve aircraft and pilots if not. Everyone understands the subtext. The war is lost, survival is paramount, heroism is suicide. Adler volunteers for an afternoon reconnaissance patrol. Waldman, grateful for any pilot willing to fly rather than simply waiting for American tanks to arrive, approves without hesitation. Adler's assigned aircraft, Messerschmitt Bf 109G10, serial number 491386, paint code RVT+DM. The plane is relatively new, delivered to the unit in February 1945, with only 63 flight hours accumulated. Crucially, it's in excellent mechanical condition. What happens next unfolds across 3 distinct timelines. The official version documented in Luftwaffe records, the actual sequence of events that investigators pieced together in 2024, and the carefully constructed deception that allowed Adler to vanish. 14 hours, April 28, 1945. Hauptmann Adler takes off from Neubiberg on a reconnaissance patrol, heading southwest toward the advancing American front lines. 15:43 hours. Adler's wingman, Lieutenant Kaufmann, radios that American fighters have been spotted near Fuestenfeldbruck. Adler acknowledges and turns to engage. 16 hours. Kaufmann reports that Adler's aircraft has been hit by fire from American P-51 Mustangs. He sees smoke streaming from Adler's engine. Adler's last radio transmission: "I'm going down. Can't maintain altitude." 16:08 hours. Kaufmann reports losing visual contact with Adler's aircraft in heavy cloud cover over the Bavarian Alps. He circles the area for 14 minutes but sees no crash site, no parachute, no sign of survival. Weather conditions: overcast, visibility less than 2 kilometers, snow showers. 16:45 hours. Kaufmann returns to Neubiberg and reports Hauptmann Adler as missing in action, presumed killed. This official account would stand unchallenged for 79 years. The deception began 4 days earlier. April 24, 1945. 19:30 hours. Oberleutnant Karl Richter meets Adler in a storage bunker on the edge of Neubiberg Air Base. Richter brings a canvas bag containing items he spent the past 6 weeks acquiring: a Swiss passport in the name of Hans Muller, born 1918 in Zurich, occupation listed as mechanical engineer; a complete set of civilian clothing, carefully selected to appear worn but not threadbare; 3,800 Swiss francs in various denominations; a Wehrmacht travel permit forged to show authorization for Hans Muller to move through military zones as a technical consultant. Richter's price: 4,000 Reichsmarks and Adler's Knight's Cross, the original, not the replica. Adler pays without hesitation. The Knight's Cross that Hermann Göring personally pinned to his uniform 13 months earlier now becomes currency for survival. April 25th. Adler makes a series of seemingly routine decisions that investigators would later recognize as preparation. He requests maintenance checks on aircraft 491,386, claiming he's noticed slight vibration in the engine. The mechanics find nothing wrong, but the request establishes that Adler specifically wants to fly that particular aircraft. He mentions casually to Kaufman that he's considering a reconnaissance route toward Innsbruck, establishing expectation that he might fly toward the Alps. April 26th. Adler takes aircraft 491,386 on a test flight. Duration, 47 minutes. He flies southwest, ostensibly checking engine performance, but actually memorizing landmarks, valleys, and potential landing sites. He returns and reports the aircraft performing adequately. That evening, Adler packs his leather document case, his Soldbuch, his Swiss passport as Hans Muller, the Swiss francs, a small photograph of his family, and a map of southern Bavaria and western Austria with certain valleys marked in barely visible pencil. He writes the note that investigators will find 79 years later. Wer dies findet, ich lebe. April 27th. Adler spends the day in his quarters claiming mild illness, a headache, nothing serious. He's actually memorizing his escape route, rehearsing his timeline, and preparing mentally for what comes next. That evening, he burns several personal letters in the officer's quarters stove. No one pays attention. Everyone is burning something. April 28th, 1945. 14 hours. Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Adler takes off from Neubiberg in aircraft 491,386. His wingman, Lieutenant Kaufmann, flies beside him. The weather forecast: deteriorating conditions over the Alps, with heavy cloud cover expected by 16 hours. 14 hours. Adler radios Kaufmann, "I'm detecting engine roughness, going to reduce altitude and investigate." This is the first lie. 15 hours. The two aircraft approach Fuestenfeldbruck. American P-51s are indeed in the area. Adler had listened to radio traffic all morning and timed his flight to coincide with expected American patrols. 15:43 hours. This is where Adler's planning becomes brilliant and ruthless. He doesn't wait for Americans to attack. Instead, he deliberately maneuvers his aircraft into a position where engagement seems inevitable, then radios Kaufmann. Americans, 11 o'clock high. The Americans dive to engage. In the chaotic seconds that follow, Adler does something that goes unnoticed. He activates his aircraft's smoke generator, a device intended to obscure visibility during combat, and simultaneously throttles back his engine while entering a dive. To Kaufmann, several hundred meters away and focused on the Americans, it appears that Adler's aircraft has been hit and is trailing smoke. 16:02 hours. Adler transmits his final message: "I'm going down, can't maintain altitude." The transmission is calm, controlled, exactly what a skilled pilot would sound like while attempting a forced landing. Then he disappears into the clouds. What actually happens next would remain unknown until forensic analysis in 2024 provided evidence. Adler doesn't crash. He levels out at 1,200 meters, still hidden in clouds, and turns southwest. He flies for exactly 11 minutes, navigating by compass and dead reckoning, a skill he's practiced for months. He's heading for a specific valley in the Bavarian Alps that he scouted during his test flight 2 days earlier. At 19 hours, Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Adler finds the valley he's memorized. It's narrow, steep-sided, and most crucially, terminates in a glacier at its upper end. He climbs to 2,800 meters, positions his aircraft on a precise heading, and reduces power to just above stalling speed. What he does next requires extraordinary skill and nerves that most pilots don't possess. He deliberately stalls the aircraft 40 meters above the glacier's surface, allows it to pancake onto the snow, and cuts the engine at the moment of impact. The crash is violent but survivable. The Bf-109's landing gear collapses. The propeller tears itself apart. The fuselage crumples and twists, but the cockpit remains intact, and Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, though bruised and bleeding from a gash above his left eye, is conscious and mobile. The time is 21 hours. He has perhaps 30 minutes before Kaufmann begins searching for him, and Kaufmann will be searching 25 kilometers north in the area where Adler went down. Adler moves with practiced efficiency. He retrieves his leather document case from beneath the seat. He strips off his flight suit, revealing civilian clothing underneath. He wraps the flight suit around a stone and throws it into a crevasse 50 meters from the wreck. He takes nothing else from the aircraft except one item, his soul butch and the note he's written. These he leaves in the document case and wedges it beneath the pilot's seat, a deliberate message for whoever might find the wreck. At 34 hours, Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, now Hans Muller, Swiss technical consultant, begins walking down the glacier. The transformation is complete. The official version shows him dead. The actual timeline shows him very much alive, descending through snow and ice toward the first waypoint in an escape route that will take him across 3 countries. Behind him, his aircraft will slowly disappear under accumulating snow. Within 2 years, it will be completely buried. The glacier will hold his secret for nearly 8 decades. Ahead of him, survival depends on reaching the first safe house before dark, a farmhouse 14 kilometers down the valley where Oberleutnant Richter's network has arranged shelter. The snowfall intensifies. By 17:00 hours, visibility drops to less than 100 meters. This is both danger and advantage. No one can find him, but he can barely navigate. He follows the valley downward, staying close to the western slope where the terrain is less steep. At 18:47 hours, with darkness falling and his legs burning from exertion, Adler sees lights in the distance. A farmhouse, exactly where Richter promised it would be. He knocks on the door at 19:05 hours. A woman answers, Anna Berger, age 54, whose husband died on the Eastern Front in 1943. She looks at the man on her doorstep, bruised, bleeding, exhausted, but holding himself with unmistakable military bearing despite his civilian clothes. "Hans Muller?" she asks. "Yes," Adler replies. His voice is steady despite everything. "Carl sent me." Anna Berger opens the door wider. "Come in quickly. The Americans are only 30 kilometers west." Friedrich Wilhelm Adler steps inside, and Hauptmann Adler ceases to exist. March 2024. 89 months after the initial discovery, the investigation has expanded far beyond a simple aircraft recovery. Dr. Klaus Bergmann's research team had initially planned to catalog the crash site, recover the wreckage for museum display, and conclude their work. But the empty cockpit and the handwritten note transformed everything. By April 15, 2024, the Technical University of Munich team had been joined by investigators from the Bundesarchiv, the Zentralstelle der Landesjustizverwaltungen, Central Office of State Justice Administrations, and Interpol's Cold Case Unit. The question driving the investigation: if Friedrich Wilhelm Adler survived his staged crash on April 28, 1945, where did he go? The forensic analysis begins with the aircraft itself. Dr. Martina Schreiber, the forensic specialist who discovered the empty cockpit, coordinates the wreckage examination. Her team transports the Bf-109's remains to a climate-controlled facility in Munich on April 20, 2024. The analysis takes 3 weeks and yields critical insights. First, the impact pattern. Aviation accident investigator Hermann Klaus, retired from the Bundesstelle für Flugunfalluntersuchung, examines the structural damage. His report, dated May 8, 2024, concludes, the aircraft impacted the glacier at low speed, approximately 9110 kilometers per hour, in a controlled pancake landing attitude. This is inconsistent with combat damage or loss of control. The pilot deliberately landed the aircraft on the glacier. Second, the cockpit condition. Despite nearly 80 years of glacial pressure, the cockpit interior remains remarkably preserved. Forensic photographer Lisa Brandor documents every detail. She finds no blood except for small droplets on the control column and canopy frame, consistent with a minor injury, likely a cut from broken glass. She finds no fabric fragments from a flight suit. Most tellingly, she finds the shoulder harness disconnected and the canopy release handle in the open position. Someone walked away from this crash, Brandor tells the investigative team during a briefing on May 12, 2024. And they walked away prepared. They didn't frantically claw their way out. They methodically opened the canopy, released their harness, and exited the aircraft deliberately. Third, the document case. The leather case, its contents, and especially the handwritten note become the focus of intensive analysis. Forensic document examiner Dr. Tobias Reinhardt, based at the Bundeskriminalamt, Federal Criminal Police Office in Wiesbaden, receives the Soldbuch and note on May 15, 2024. His examination takes 3 days and employs techniques ranging from traditional handwriting analysis to spectroscopic dating of the ink. His report, filed May 18, 2024, confirms the handwriting in the note matches known samples of Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's handwriting from flight logs, personal letters, and military documents. The ink composition is consistent with standard Pelikan blue-black ink manufactured between 1935 and 1948. Paper composition matches Luftwaffe standard issue document paper from the same period. There is no evidence of forgery or modern fabrication. But Dr. Reinhardt's analysis reveals something else, something that makes him immediately contact the investigation's lead coordinator, Inspector Johann Kraus from the Bavarian State Criminal Police Office. The note's phrasing is deliberate, Reinhardt explains during a phone call on May 18th. He doesn't say "I survived" or "I escaped." He says "Ich lebe," "I am alive," present tense, and then "Ich bin bereits gegangen," "I am already gone," again present tense, even though he's writing about a future action. This is a man who's mentally committed to his plan before executing it. He's speaking from the perspective of his future self. Inspector Kraus assigns a team of 6 investigators to reconstruct Adler's final months. Their orders: examine every document, interview every surviving witness, follow every lead, no matter how minor. The investigation's breakthrough comes not from the aircraft itself, but from archives 450 kilometers away. May 22, 2024. Research assistant Maria Hoffmann, working at the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg, discovers an anomaly in Neubiberg Air Base's supply records from April 1945. Between March 1 and April 20, 1945, the base recorded 47 separate disbursements of miscellaneous administrative supplies to Oberleutnant Karl Richter. The total value, 18,450 Reichsmarks. That's not normal, Hoffmann tells her supervisor. That's more than twice the annual budget for administrative supplies for an entire base. Further investigation reveals that Karl Richter served as supply officer at Neubiberg from January 1943 until the base's surrender to American forces on April 30, 1945. American interrogation records, declassified in 1975 and now digitized, show that Richter was questioned briefly about black market activities, but released without charges in July 1945. The critical detail appears in a footnote. Richter had maintained a list of clients, officers who'd purchased goods through unofficial channels. The list contained 23 names, one of them, Hauptmann F.W. Adler. Inspector Krauss obtains authorization to access deeper archives. On May 28, 2024, his team uncovers Richter's financial records, seized by American Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, in May 1945 but never fully analyzed. The records are meticulous. Richter documented every transaction, using coded abbreviations but maintaining precise dates and amounts. Entry dated April 24, 1945. FWA Special Package, 4,000 RM plus personal item. Special Package appears 17 times in Richter's records between January and April 1945. Each time, the client pays significantly more than for standard black market goods, usually 3,000 to 5,000 Reichsmarks. Krauss assigns investigator Sandra Weiss to determine what special package meant. Weiss spends 2 weeks cross-referencing Richter's clients with post-war records. Of the 17 people who received special packages, 11 were declared killed in action in April 1945. Their bodies were never recovered. 5 others officially disappeared in the war's final weeks and were declared dead in absentia by German courts in the 1950s. Only one recipient of a special package has confirmed survival: Oberleutnant Heinrich Weber, who surrendered to American forces on May 3, 1945, and lived until 1987. Weiss tracks down Weber's daughter, Catherine Weberschmidt, now 64 years old, living in Stuttgart. The interview takes place on June 10, 2024. "My father never spoke about the war," Weberschmidt tells Weiss, "except once when I was 19 years old. He was dying lung cancer and I think he wanted to unburden himself. He told me he'd planned to disappear. He had false papers, money, everything arranged. But at the last moment he couldn't do it. He said, 'Others went through. I didn't have the courage.'" "Did he say what the papers were?" Weiss asks. "Swiss passport, false name. He said a supply officer at his base arranged it. Cost him everything he'd saved, 4,000 Reichsmarks and his Iron Cross." The pattern becomes clear. Karl Richter operated an escape network. For the right price, he provided forged documents, probably Swiss passports, since Switzerland's neutrality made Swiss citizens relatively safe throughout occupied Europe. But the investigation needs to trace where these escapees went. Richter's records end on April 28, 1945, the same day Adler staged his death. The American CIC seized the records 2 days later when they captured Neuberberg. The trail appears cold until June 15, 2024, when genealogist Dr. Emil Fischer contacts the investigation team. Fischer specializes in tracing family histories disrupted by World War II. He'd read about the Adler investigation in Der Spiegel and remembered something odd from his research 5 years earlier. "I was helping a client trace their grandfather's movements after the war," Fischer explains to Inspector Krauss during a video call. The grandfather, Ludwig Sommer, worked as a carpenter in a small village near Garmisch-Partenkirchen. The village records showed that in late April 1945, Sommer's farm sheltered several refugees. But here's what caught my attention. The municipal registry listed them as refugees, but none of them registered with Allied authorities afterward, which was mandatory. They just appeared for a few days, then vanished. Fischer sends the village name: Eschenloh, population 843 in 1945, located 64 kilometers south of Munich. Krauss dispatches investigators to Eschenloh on June 18, 2024. The village maintains meticulous records dating back to the 1600s. The municipal archive, housed in the village hall's basement, contains registration logs from the war period. The entry for April 29, 1945, lists 6 names under temporary residence: Hans Muller, Swiss; Joseph Kramer, German; Paul Schneider, German; Ernst Wagner, Swiss; Maria Bergmann, Swiss; and Otto Steiner, German. Next to each name, Departed May 2, 1945. Destination: Switzerland. The log entry includes a crucial detail. Temporary residence housed at Berger Farm, 4.2 km north of village center. Anna Berger's farm, the same Anna Berger whose husband died on the Eastern Front. The investigators drive to the coordinates on June 19th. The farmhouse still stands, now owned by Anna Berger's grandson, Michael Berger, age 68. Michael Berger invites the investigators inside. "My grandmother died in 1978, he tells them. But before she died, she told my mother something she'd never told anyone else. She said that in the final weeks of the war, a man from Munich, she never gave his name, paid her 500 Reichsmarks to shelter people who were traveling. She sheltered 12 people total between mid-April and early May 1945. All of them stayed less than 3 days. All of them continued south toward the Austrian border." "Did your grandmother say anything else about these people?" Inspector Krauss asks. "Just one thing. She said one of them was a pilot. She knew because he had a cut on his forehead in the exact pattern pilots got from hitting their heads on cockpit instruments during rough landings. She'd seen that injury before. Her brother had been a Luftwaffe mechanic." The investigation now has Adler's escape route's first waypoint. The Berger farm, approximately 14 kilometers from his crash site, reached on the evening of April 28, 1945. The second waypoint emerges from Swiss archives. On June 25, 2024, Inspector Krauss contacts the Swiss Federal Archives in Bern. He requests records of Swiss citizens re-entering Switzerland from Germany between April 20th and May 15th, 1945. The Swiss kept extensive border control records. By June 30th, the archives send a digitized response. 247 Swiss citizens crossed from Germany into Switzerland during that period. The records include passport numbers, dates, and entry points. On May 3, 1945, at the Lindau-Bregenz border crossing on Lake Constance, a Swiss citizen named Hans Muller, passport number CH47899231, entered Switzerland. The border guard's notes indicate, "Returning from technical consultancy work in Bavaria, appeared fatigued but papers in order." The passport number is fake. Switzerland never issued a passport with that series. But in the chaos of May 1945, with hundreds of thousands of displaced persons moving across borders, the forgery passed inspection. Investigators now know Adler's route. Crash site to Berger Farm, April 28th. Berger Farm to Eschenloh, April 29th. Eschenloh to the Austrian border, probably April 30th, May 2nd. Border crossing into Switzerland, May 3rd. But Switzerland is neutral territory. Swiss law prevented extradition of refugees. If Adler reached Switzerland, he achieved sanctuary. The investigation team needs to determine, did Adler stay in Switzerland, or was it merely a transit point? The answer comes from an unexpected source, bank records. July 8, 2024. Financial investigator Thomas Kellerman, on loan from Germany's Federal Financial Supervisory Authority, begins examining Swiss banking records from 1945-19 for 6. Swiss privacy laws normally prevent such examination, but Switzerland's 2024 transparency agreements allow access to historical records from before 1950 for criminal investigations. Kellerman focuses on accounts opened by German-speaking males in May-June 1945. The search parameters yield 1,847 accounts. He narrows the search. Accounts opened with deposits between 3,000 and 4,000 Swiss francs, the amount Adler carried. 43 accounts match. He narrows further. Accounts that showed activity for only 3-8 weeks before being closed with funds transferred internationally. 7 accounts match. On July 11, 2024, Kellerman finds it. Account number CHZH4521194508847, opened May 6, 1945 at Schweizerisch Kreditanstalt in Zurich. Initial deposit, 3,650 Swiss francs. Account holder, Hans Muller. The account remained active for exactly 38 days. Final transaction, June 13, 1945. The entire balance, 3,420 francs after account fees, was withdrawn in cash. The account was closed the same day. The withdrawal slip preserved in the bank's archives includes a notation. Client indicated travel to South America. Confirmed destination, Argentina. The Adler investigation had uncovered something far larger than one pilot's escape. By July 2024, Inspector Johann Kraus and his team recognized they'd stumbled upon a systematic network, one of several ratlins that helped German military personnel, Nazi officials, and war criminals vanish into new lives as the Third Reich collapsed. The documentation of this network required months of archival research, cross-referencing records from 5 countries, and interviews with descendants of people who'd operated safe houses nearly 80 years earlier. Karl Richter, the Neubiberg supply officer who provided Adler's false papers, represented only the network's entry point. The full infrastructure was far more sophisticated. Investigators piece together the network's structure through multiple sources. First, they analyze Richter's seized financial records more thoroughly. The special package transactions don't occur randomly, they cluster in specific time periods. Between January 15th and January 28th, 1945, 6 transactions. Between February 8th and February 19th, 4 transactions. Between April 10th and April 24th, 7 transactions. Pattern recognition specialist Dr. Hannah Wolf, consulting for the investigation, identifies the significance. These aren't ad hoc arrangements. The network operates in batches. Richter accumulates clients over 2-3 weeks, then processes them together. This suggests coordinated movement. People travel in groups, probably with guides. Second, the investigators examine Allied intelligence records. American Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, files, declassified progressively between 1975 and 2010, reveal that Allied authorities were aware of escape networks operating from southern Germany into Austria and Switzerland. A CIC report dated June 15, 1945, specifically mentions multiple German military personnel believed to have escaped through Alpine routes using forged Swiss documents. Network infrastructure likely includes safe houses in Bavarian villages and guide services across mountain passes. But the Allies had larger priorities in June 1945. With millions of displaced persons, the collapse of German civilian administration, and the beginning of war crimes trials, tracking individual escapees ranked low on the priority list, unless they were high-value targets like concentration camp commandants or SS generals. Third, and most revealing, are the interviews with descendants of network operators. On July 19, 2024, investigator Sandra Weiss travels to Garmisch-Partenkirchen to interview Johann Huber, age 91, whose father operated a safe house in Obrau, a village 15 kilometers from Eschenloh. Huber's testimony, recorded over 2 days, provides the most detailed description of how the network functioned. My father, Georg Huber, was a veterinarian. He treated farm animals throughout the region, which meant he traveled constantly and knew every back road, every mountain path, every isolated farm. Starting in late 1944, a man from Munich, my father never told me his name, approached him with a proposition. My father would shelter people traveling south toward Switzerland. In exchange, he'd receive payment, sometimes money, sometimes valuables like jewelry or artwork. My father wasn't political. He wasn't a Nazi, but he wasn't a resistance fighter either. He helped because he needed money. Our village was starving. The war had taken everything. The people who came to our house, I was 10 years old, I remember them clearly. stayed 1 or 2 nights maximum. They always arrived after dark. They always traveled in small groups, usually 3-5 people. They ate whatever we could spare, slept in our barn, and left before dawn. My father would guide them part of the way, usually about 10 kilometers south, to another farm where someone else would continue the route. It was like a relay race. The travelers never gave their real names. I remember my mother calling them all Herr Schmidt or Herr Muller, regardless of how many people were there. One thing I remember distinctly, one man who came through in late April 1945, I think it was April 29th or 30th, right before everything collapsed, had a bandage over his left eyebrow. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and he moved like a soldier even though he wore civilian clothes. My father took him and 4 others south toward Mittenwald that night. I never knew what happened to them after that. Weiss shows Johann Huber a photograph of Friedrich Wilhelm Adler from 1944. Huber studies it for nearly a minute. "That could be him," Huber says slowly. "It's been 79 years and I only saw him for a few hours. But yes, the face shape is right. And the bandage was over the left eyebrow, exactly where this man has a scar in the photo." Adler's 1944 photo shows a faint scar from a 1940 training accident. The investigators now have the route's third waypoint. The Huber farm in Oberau probably reached April 29-30. Mapping the complete network requires integrating multiple testimonies. By August 2024, the investigation team has interviewed 17 people whose relatives operated safe houses or served as guides. A pattern emerges. The network operated in 5 stages, each handled by different personnel. Stage 1, documentation. Karl Richter and at least 2 other forgers, identities still unknown in Munich, produced false identity papers. The standard package included Swiss passport with false name, Wehrmacht travel permit, and identity papers showing residence in a neutral country. The papers cost 3,500 Reichsmarks or equivalent valuables. Production time, 1-2 weeks. Stage 2, initial movement. Clients received instructions to travel to specific locations near Munich on specific dates. They traveled alone or in pairs to avoid suspicion. Meeting points included a cafe in Peine, western Munich suburb, a church in Salm, southern suburb, and a bookshop in Giesing, eastern suburb. At these locations, a contact, usually a woman who attracted less suspicion, provided the next waypoint address and departure time. Stage 3, safe houses. A chain of safe houses stretched from Munich suburbs to the Austrian border, a distance of approximately 95 kilometers. The houses were typically isolated farms owned by people who needed money or had anti-Nazi sentiments. Clients moved from house to house, spending 1-2 nights at each location. The safe houses identified by investigators include Berger Farm near Eschenloh, 14 km from Adler's crash site. Huber Farm, Oberau, 29 km from Berger Farm. Schneider Farm near Mittenwald, 21 km from Huber Farm. Wagner Farm, Scharnitz, Austria, 8 km from Schneider Farm, first location across the border. Stage 4, border crossing. This was the network's most vulnerable point. The German-Austrian border was heavily patrolled even in April 1945, and the Austrian-Swiss border had strict Swiss controls. The network employed 3 methods. Mountain passes. Guides led clients through high-altitude passes where official checkpoints didn't exist. This required good physical condition and favorable weather. Most dangerous but most reliable. False credentials. Clients with high-quality forged papers attempted to cross at official checkpoints, claiming to be Swiss citizens returning home. Success rate approximately 60-70% based on testimonial evidence. Bribery. When other methods failed, border guards received payment, usually gold or jewelry, to overlook irregular documentation. Adler almost certainly used method 2. successfully crossing at Lindau-Bregenz on May 3, 1945. Stage 5. Dispersal. Once in Switzerland, clients received assistance reaching their final destinations. A contact in Zurich, identity never confirmed, helped arrange onward travel. Destinations included Argentina, most common, Brazil, Chile, Spain, and the Middle East, particularly Syria and Egypt, which had limited extradition agreements. The economics of escape were brutal and revealing. Financial investigator Thomas Kellerman calculates that the network processed approximately 40-60 people between January and May 1945, based on Richter's records and safe house testimonies. At 4,000 Reichsmarks per person, the network generated revenue of 160,040,000 Reichsmarks, roughly equivalent to $600,900 in 2024 purchasing power. But the costs were substantial. Forged documents, materials expertise risk. Safe house payments, 300-500 Reichsmarks per client per location. Guide fees, 500-1,000 Reichsmarks per trip. Border crossing bribes, variable but often 1,000 plus Reichsmarks. Transportation arrangements, vehicles, fuel extremely scarce in 1945. Kellerman estimates the network's operators cleared approximately 40-50% profit, still substantial, but not the massive windfall it might appear. This was a business, Kellerman explains in his report dated August 15, 2024. The operators were motivated by profit, not ideology. They helped Wehrmacht officers and Nazi officials alike, as long as they could pay. Morally reprehensible but economically rational in a collapsing state where traditional currency was becoming worthless. The investigation identifies several other network users besides Adler. SS Hauptsturmführer Eduard Klein documented war crimes in Poland, reached Argentina by August 1945, lived under the name Eduardo Alarcón until his death in 1967. Wehrmacht Major Wilhelm Stark, no war crimes documented, reached Brazil by July 1945, operated a machinery business in Sao Paulo under his real name, died 1979. Luftwaffe Oberleutnant Helmut Vogel, no war crimes documented, reached Switzerland but returned to Germany in 1947 after amnesty programs began, lived quietly in Hamburg until 1998. Nazi Party official name still under investigation, with documented involvement in forced labor programs, reached Syria by September 1945, subsequent fate unknown. The list reveals the network's moral indifference. It served Wehrmacht officers who'd committed no crimes alongside perpetrators of atrocities, as long as they paid. The network operated for only 5 months, January through May 1945. It collapsed not through Allied action, but through the simple disappearance of its operators. Karl Richter surrendered to American forces on April 30, 1945, destroying his most sensitive records before capture. He served 2 years in a POW camp, was released in 1947, and lived in Munich until his death in 1981. He never spoke publicly about the network. The safe house operators simply stopped accepting clients when the war ended. Most claimed they'd helped refugees or wounded soldiers, which was technically true if conveniently incomplete. The guides vanished into post-war anonymity. Their identities remain unknown. By July 1945, the network existed only in fragmentary records, scattered testimonies, and the memories of men who had every reason to forget it. For Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, the network represented survival. For investigators in 2024, it represented something more troubling, evidence of how efficiently desperation, expertise, and money could circumvent justice. Switzerland, May 1945. Hans Muller, the identity Friedrich Wilhelm Adler now inhabited, crossed the border into a country untouched by the devastation that had consumed Germany. Swiss cities had electricity, intact buildings, functioning commerce, and food that wasn't rationed into starvation portions. The contrast must have been psychologically overwhelming for a man who'd spent the previous 6 years in war zones. Adler spent 38 days in Switzerland, primarily in Zurich. Investigators trace his movements through fragmentary records. May 6, 1945. Opens bank account at Schweizerisch Kreditanstalt, deposits 3,650 Swiss francs. May 9, 1945. Registers for temporary residence at a boarding house on Muhlegasse, near Zurich's Old Town. The registration, preserved in Zurich Municipal Archives, lists his occupation as mechanical engineer seeking employment opportunities. May 12, May 31st. The trail goes cold. No records exist of Adler's activities during these 19 days. He likely remained in Zurich, planning his next move and waiting for opportunities to travel onward. Europe in May 1945 was still chaotic. Borders were closing, travel restrictions tightening, and displaced persons were being systematically processed by Allied authorities. Moving too quickly would attract attention. June 2, 1945. A crucial document emerges from Argentine immigration archives. Hans Muller, Swiss citizen, passport number CH4789231, submits an application for Argentine immigration at the Argentine consulate in Zurich. The application, reviewed by investigators in August 2024, lists his profession as aeronautical engineer and states his intention to contribute technical expertise to Argentine industrial development. The timing is significant. Argentina, under President Juan Domingo Perón, who would officially take office in 1946 but already wielded substantial influence, actively recruited European technical experts. The policy was officially justified as necessary for Argentina's industrialization, but it conveniently provided cover for German nationals, including Nazi officials and war criminals, to enter Argentina with minimal scrutiny. June 13, 1945. Adler withdraws his entire bank balance and closes his account. The notation indicates travel to Argentina. Then Friedrich Wilhelm Adler vanishes from European records entirely. The investigation's next phase requires cooperation from Argentine authorities. In September 2024, Inspector Kraus formally requests assistance from the Argentine Federal Police and the Argentine National Archives. The Argentine response arrives on October 8, 2024, after bureaucratic delays. It includes immigration records, census data, and death certificates covering 1945-2000. The critical document, immigration record dated August 23, 1945. Hans Muller, Swiss citizen, arrived in Buenos Aires aboard the SS Campana, a Portuguese-flagged cargo vessel that had sailed from Genoa, Italy. Muller's entry visa is stamped and approved. Occupation listed, aeronautical engineer. Intended residence, Buenos Aires Federal District. Why the 2-month gap between leaving Switzerland and arriving in Argentina? Investigators determined that Adler likely traveled from Switzerland to Genoa, Italy's largest port, waited there for available transport, then booked passage on one of the few vessels offering transatlantic service in mid-1945. The voyage from Genoa to Buenos Aires typically took 26 days in 1945, suggesting Adler departed Genoa around July 28, August 1st. Once in Argentina, Hans Muller becomes even more difficult to trace. Argentina's record-keeping in the 1940s 1950s was inconsistent, particularly for immigrant communities. But fragments exist. 1947 Buenos Aires City Directory lists Hans Muller, engineer, at an address on Cal Tucumán in the San Nicolás district. No telephone number recorded. 1951 Argentine census. A Hans Muller, age 33, born Switzerland, occupation technical consultant, residing in Buenos Aires. This matches Adler's real age. He would have been 33 in 1951. 1955. A business registration for Muller y Asociados, Consultoria Técnica, Muller and Associates, Technical Consultancy. The business address, Avenida Cordoba 1247, Buenos Aires. The registration lists Hans Muller as sole proprietor. The business registration provides investigators with their first substantial lead. Argentine commercial law required business owners to submit tax filings, which meant paper trails. Financial investigator Thomas Kellerman travels to Buenos Aires on October 22, 2024. Working with Argentine archivists, he locates tax records for Muller y Asociados, covering 1955-1971. The records show a modest but successful business. Annual revenues range from 45,000 to 120,000 Argentine pesos, approximately $35,090 USD in 2024 equivalent. The business provides technical consulting for Argentine manufacturing companies, particularly in metalworking and precision mechanics, industries where Adler's engineering background and aviation experience would be valuable. But the most revealing discovery comes from the business's employee records. Between 1955 and 1969, Muller y Asociados employed between 3 and 7 people. Employment contracts, required by Argentine labor law, list employees' full names and national identification numbers. One employee stands out. Eduardo Hoffman, hired in 1958, employed until 1971. His national ID indicates birth year, 1920. His emergency contact listed on his employment contract, Hans Muller. Investigator Sandra Weiss cross-references the name Eduardo Hoffman with German immigration records. She finds Eduard Hoffman, German citizen, immigrated to Argentina in 1947. Before immigration, he resided in Munich, where he worked in aircraft maintenance. Further investigation reveals Eduard Hoffman's Luftwaffe service record. Oberfeldwebel Eduard Hoffman, aircraft mechanic, served with Jagdgeschwader 53, the same unit as Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, from 1942 to 1945. The connection is too specific to be coincidental. Adler employed a former comrade from his Luftwaffe squadron. Either Hoffman recognized Hans Muller as Adler and kept the secret, or Adler revealed his true identity to a trusted friend. Weiss locates Eduard Hoffman's death certificate. Died January 14, 1972 in Buenos Aires, age 52, cause of death listed as heart failure. He left no children. His wife, Maria Hoffman, died in 1988. The trail through Hoffman leads nowhere further, but it confirms that Adler maintained connections to his past while building his new life. The most emotionally significant discovery comes from an unexpected source, a German genealogy website. On November 3, 2024, researcher Maria Hoffman, no relation to Eduard Hoffman, contacts the investigation team. She's been researching her family tree and discovered that her grandmother was Clara Adler's cousin. In that research, she found something strange. Letters her grandmother received between 1949 and 1963. "My grandmother kept everything," Hoffman tells investigators. "I found a box of letters in her attic after she died in 2006. Most were from relatives, but there were 7 letters from Switzerland with no return address. The postmarks showed they were mailed from Zurich, but the letters were signed only with the initial F." Hoffman provides photographs of the letters. Forensic document examiner Dr. Tobias Reinhardt analyzes them immediately. His conclusion: the handwriting matches Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's known handwriting with 94% certainty. The letters are carefully worded to avoid revealing the sender's identity, but they contain specific references that only someone who knew Clara Adler intimately would know. One letter, dated June 15, 1951, reads in part, "I think often of the house on Hauptstrasse and the garden where the apple tree grew. I remember the laughter that filled those rooms. Though I am far away, those memories sustain me in difficult times." The reference to Hauptstrasse, the street where Adler's family died, confirms the letter's author. Another letter, dated October 3, 1958, is more explicit. "I have found work that uses the skills I learned long ago. My colleagues respect my expertise, though they know nothing of where that expertise came from. I live quietly, and I live with ghosts." The final letter in the collection, dated March 22, 1963, is brief. "I am growing older. The past becomes more present each year. I wonder sometimes if I made the right choices, but I cannot unmake them now. Please remember that I love them more than my own life. That at least was never false." The letters were mailed from Switzerland, but investigators determined this was a precautionary measure. Adler likely sent the letters to a contact in Switzerland, who then remailed them, disguising their true origin. The letters prove Adler maintained emotional connections to his past, even while hiding under a false identity. Hans Muller's business closed in 1971, according to Argentine commercial registries. Tax records from 1970, 11978 show Muller filing as an individual, reporting income from retirement pension and consulting, suggesting he'd scaled back his activities as he aged. Then on September 17, 1978, a death certificate is filed in Buenos Aires for Hans Muller, age 60, Swiss citizen, cause of death, myocardial infarction, heart attack. Place of death, Hospital Iliman, German Hospital, Buenos Aires. The age creates slight confusion. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler was born in April 1918, which would make him 60 in 1978. But Hans Muller's forged passport listed his birth year as 1918, matching Adler's real age. Adler apparently maintained consistency in his false identity. The death certificate lists no next of kin. Muller's estate, valued at 78,000 Argentine pesos, approximately $48,000 USD in 1978, was administered by a Buenos Aires law firm. After probate fees and debts were settled, the remaining funds, 42,000 pesos, were donated to a Buenos Aires orphanage, per instructions in Muller's will. Investigators obtain a copy of the will on November 15, 2024. The document, witnessed and notarized in 1976, contains one paragraph that is almost certainly Adler's confession. "I have lived under a name that was not given to me at birth. I have built a life from ruins. I have caused no harm to my adopted country, and I have tried to live with honor despite my deceptions. My sins are my own, and I face judgment, whatever form it takes, with clear eyes." Hans Muller was buried on September 20, 1978, at Cementerio Alemán German Cemetery in Buenos Aires. The grave marker, photographed by investigators in November 2024, reads simply, "Hans Muller, 1918-1978, Descansa en paz, rest in peace." Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, who survived 6 years of war, the death of his family, and a meticulously staged disappearance, died at age 60 of natural causes, 11,619 kilometers from the country of his birth. He lived 33 years under a false identity. No one who knew him as Hans Muller ever publicly revealed they'd suspected his true identity. The investigation cannot determine with absolute certainty that Hans Muller was Friedrich Wilhelm Adler. DNA evidence is impossible without exhuming the body, which Argentine authorities have not authorized as of March 2025. But the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. The timing, the locations, the age, the profession, the Luftwaffe connections, the letters, and the will's confession. If Hans Muller was not Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, the coincidences strain credulity. The Adler case forces difficult questions that historians and ethicists continue to debate. Was Friedrich Wilhelm Adler a war criminal? The investigation found no evidence that Adler committed war crimes as defined by the Nuremberg Principles. He was not documented as participating in atrocities, executing prisoners, or engaging in the systemic violence that characterized Nazi military operations in occupied territories. His service record shows combat operations against military targets, Allied aircraft, primarily. But this exoneration is incomplete and unsatisfying. Dr. Hannah Klein, historian at the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich, offers this perspective in an interview conducted in December 2024. Adler served the Nazi regime. He fought for 6 years to preserve and extend a system that committed genocide. The question of whether he personally killed civilians is almost beside the point. He was a component in the machine. Does the gear in the machine bear responsibility for what the machine does? Philosophically, I believe yes. Legally, the answer is more complex. The legal complexity lies in distinguishing between military service, which international law recognizes as obligatory for citizens of belligerent nations, and active participation in war crimes. Adler joined the Luftwaffe in 1936, before the invasion of Poland, before the Holocaust's implementation, before the regime's full criminality became apparent. By the time the regime's nature was undeniable, leaving the military meant execution for desertion. His choices narrowed to fight, desert and die, or surrender and face uncertain fate as POW. His staged escape in April 1945 represented a fourth option: survive without formally surrendering. But survival came at a cost that others paid. Consider, Adler's false identity documents required forged Swiss passports. Real Swiss citizens named Hans Muller existed. The forgers used authentic names with falsified details to make papers harder to detect. If the real Hans Muller had attempted to travel in 1940-519 for 6, he might have encountered difficulties or accusations based on Adler's use of his identity. Consider, the network that facilitated Adler's escape also helped genuine war criminals flee justice. SS Hauptsturmführer Eduard Klein, documented participant in mass killings in Poland, used the same network, paid the same operators, stayed at the same safe houses. By participating in the network, Adler enabled its continued operation, which enabled Klein's escape. Consider, every German officer who escaped justice represented an affront to the victims who deserved to see perpetrators held accountable. Even if Adler personally committed no crimes, his escape contributed to a culture of impunity. Dr. Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter who died in 2005, once wrote, "Survival is not neutral. How one survives, what one does to survive, whom one harms to survive, these are moral questions, not merely practical ones." The Adler case embodies this principle. Yet the case also reveals uncomfortable truth about how we assign moral responsibility. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler lost his entire family to an Allied bombing error. The raid that killed his wife and children was a navigation mistake. The bombers meant to hit industrial targets near Mannheim, but instead killed civilians in Heidelberg. By the rules of war, this was not a war crime. It was tragic but lawful collateral damage. But try explaining lawful collateral damage to a father who must bury his 3-year-old daughter. The bombing that killed Adler's family occurred on February 22, 1945, 66 days before he staged his escape. In those 66 days, what did he owe to a regime that had failed to protect his family, that had dragged his country into a catastrophic war, that had committed atrocities in his nation's name? Legal scholar Dr. Andreas Hoffman, writing in the Zeitschrift für Rechtswissenschaft in January 2025, argues, Adler's loyalty to the German state died with his family. His escape was not desertion from legitimate authority but withdrawal from a criminal enterprise. We should view it not as evasion of justice, but as refusal to die for injustice. Others disagree vehemently. Activist and Holocaust educator Rachel Stein, whose grandparents died in Auschwitz, responds, "Every German who survived by escaping rather than facing justice is an insult to the 6 million who had no chance to escape. I don't care if Adler pulled a trigger or not. He wore the uniform. He fought for the regime. He should have surrendered and faced whatever judgment the Allies imposed. Instead, he ran and he hid, and he lived comfortably while my family's graves went unmarked." Both perspectives contain moral truth. The Adler case is uncomfortable precisely because it refuses simple categorization. He is neither monster nor innocent. He is neither hero nor villain. He is a man who made choices, some forced by circumstance, some freely selected, and those choices created both suffering and survival. The investigation team's final report, submitted to the Bundesarchiv in February 2025, includes this statement. We cannot render final judgment on Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's moral status. We can document his actions, trace his path, and present the evidence. We leave to others, to ethicists, historians, and to the public, the question of how to remember him. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is how many others made similar choices. Historians estimate that 5,000 to 10,000 German military personnel and Nazi officials escaped to South America between 1945 and 1955. Some were high-value war criminals like Adolf Eichmann, captured in Argentina in 1960. Most were mid-level officers, administrators, and soldiers whose individual guilt was ambiguous, but who preferred escape to uncertain Allied justice. Adler was not unique. He was simply one of thousands. Each of those thousands had families, motivations, fears. Each represented individual moral choices. Each case would require nuanced judgment. We lack the capacity for such nuance on a mass scale. We need categories: perpetrator or victim, guilty or innocent, punish or forgive. Individual stories like Adler's frustrate these categories. And that frustration is valuable. It reminds us that history is made by individuals making choices under impossible circumstances. It reminds us that justice delayed is often justice denied, but also that survival itself is not a crime. It reminds us that we should be grateful we were not forced to make such choices. December 2024, the Bavarian Alps. The crash site where Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's Messerschmitt Bf 109 lay, hidden for 79 years, has been transformed. The German federal government, in coordination with Bavarian authorities and the Technical University of Munich, has designated the location as a historical monument. A plaque installed on December 15, 2024, stands at the site coordinates 47, 5,314 degrees N, 10, 7,485 degrees E. The inscription reads in German and English. On April 28, 1945, Hauptmann Friedrich Wilhelm Adler of the Luftwaffe deliberately crashed his aircraft at this location and staged his own death. He subsequently escaped to South America, where he lived under a false identity until his death in 1978. This site commemorates not his heroism, but the complexity of individual choices in times of collective catastrophe. It reminds us that history is not simple, justice is not automatic, and the past keeps secrets until circumstance reveals them. The wreckage itself has been removed to the Deutsches Museum in Munich, where it forms part of an exhibit titled Escape and Accountability: German Military Personnel After 1945. The exhibit opened on January 17, 2025, and has attracted significant controversy. Protesters argue that displaying Adler's story glorifies escape from justice. Supporters argue that understanding how and why people like Adler escaped is essential to preventing such impunity in future conflicts. Both groups may be correct. Dr. Klaus Bergmann, the researcher whose glacial retreat study accidentally discovered the crash site, reflects on the investigation's significance during an interview in January 2025. "We set out to study climate change's effects on alpine glaciers. Instead, we uncovered a human story that had been frozen, literally and metaphorically, for nearly 8 decades. Climate change revealed Adler's secret. In a sense, the warming planet forced history to confront what it had buried. There's symbolism in that. The Earth keeps secrets, but it doesn't keep them forever." The investigation has spawned additional research projects. Historians are now systematically examining other crash sites, missing personnel records, and immigration documents to determine how many similar cases existed. Preliminary estimates suggest the Adler case is one of dozens, perhaps hundreds. Each case represents choices made in desperation, survival purchased at moral cost, and questions that resist easy answers. What the investigators found at that crash site was not merely twisted metal and a leather document case. They found evidence of human complexity, of a man who was dutiful soldier and grieving father, skilled aviator and moral fugitive, victim of circumstance and architect of deception. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler served a regime that perpetrated evil. He lost his family to war's random cruelty. He chose survival over surrender. He lived 33 years under a name that was not his own. He maintained enough conscience to write cryptic letters expressing regret, but not enough to confess publicly. He died in comfortable anonymity, while millions who suffered under the regime he served never received justice. How should we remember him? The question has no singular answer. Different people, shaped by different histories and different values, will judge Adler differently. The Holocaust survivor will judge him more harshly than the academic historian. The military veteran will judge him differently than the pacifist. The child of refugees will judge him differently than someone whose family was untouched by war. All these judgments contain truth. Perhaps the lesson is not that we should reach consensus on Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's legacy, but that we should preserve the discomfort his story creates. That discomfort is valuable. It prevents us from simplifying the past into convenient narratives. It forces us to acknowledge that people who do terrible things can also suffer terribly, that victims can also perpetrate harm, and that survival sometimes requires moral compromise. The glacier that preserved Adler's secret for 79 years is melting now. In another decade or two, it may disappear entirely. Future researchers will study a landscape transformed by climate change, just as today's historians study a moral landscape transformed by the Second World War. Both landscapes bear scars. Both reveal secrets reluctantly. Both force us to confront what we'd rather leave buried. On March 17, 2025, exactly 1 year after Dr. Bergmann's team first detected that metallic anomaly beneath the ice, a memorial ceremony takes place at the crash site. Representatives from German veteran organizations, Holocaust education groups, and Alpine rescue services attend. The gathering is small, solemn, and marked by tension. No one delivers a speech praising Friedrich Wilhelm Adler, but no one condemns him entirely either. The ceremony's purpose is not to celebrate or castigate, but to remember complexity. As the attendees stand in silence at 2,847 meters above sea level, snow begins to fall, light at first, then heavier. Within hours, the crash site will be covered again, temporarily hidden under a blanket of white. But the secret is out now. The documents are archived, the investigation is published, the story is known. The Earth kept Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's secret for 79 years. Long enough for everyone who knew him to die, long enough for the geopolitical order that created him to collapse and be replaced, long enough that his discovery feels like archaeology rather than current events, but not long enough that the questions he raises have become irrelevant. In a world still scarred by conflict, still struggling with how to balance justice and mercy, still debating how to remember complicated figures from complicated times, Friedrich Wilhelm Adler's story remains urgent. The glacier released his secret. Now we must decide what to do with it. Perhaps that is the final lesson. The Earth keeps secrets, but humans must grapple with them once revealed. And that grappling, uncomfortable, unresolved, perpetually incomplete, is the price of moral consciousness. Friedrich Wilhelm Adler died in Buenos Aires on September 17, 1978. His grave, in a German cemetery 11,619 kilometers from his birthplace, bears a name that was not his own. But his true name, his real story, and his enduring questions have now been returned to history. Whether history will judge him kindly or harshly remains uncertain. But it will judge, and in that judgment, complex, contested, and continuing, lies the difference between burial and accountability. The snow continues to fall in the Bavarian Alps, and somewhere beneath it, the ground still holds secrets we have not yet discovered.